Hello all. I think it's relatively fair to say that the MCU at the moment seems to be throwing itself off a cliff. Even if there is a difference in taste, I think most people can see there is a definite decline in the quality and the critical and monetary success of Phases 4 and so far 5. There are multiple reasons for that. One being that Endgame, whilst not being great, was a very satisfactory end to the first three phases and actually represents a jumping off point. Everything was tied up, the story ended, and two of the strongest characters had left the stage. Why go back for more? I'm not really going to touch on the MCU element, though that has an impact both in front and behind the screen, but I'm going to talk more about the destruction of legacies as I see it. After watching and reviewing Secret Invasion and watching the Avengers films afterwards, it became more apparent that there was an attempt to devalue the past. Whether it's intentional or just bad jokes, the increasing mockery of what came before will negatively affect the brand. There's an element of it in Black Panther with T'Challa being relegated in his own film, but it really starts to kick off in Thor Ragnarok, where the main character, who should be a noble, if slightly earnest warrior, is relegated to a dumb surfer dude. I mean, there's literally a scene lampooning the previous outing. Now, this is probably due to Taika's infantile humour, and that can work well in the right place, but it's terminally out of place in this and the MCU. The direction they took Thor in Endgame could have worked, but instead of going for pathos, they went for farce. And to be honest with you, the least said about Love and Thunder, the better. Similarly, the Hulk and Banner, after an almost pitch-perfect arrival in Avengers, forgetting the two previous films, and another good appearance in Age of Ultron, Ragnarok started the descent. He came off much better, being more akin to World War Hulk, and Banner's PTSD was fully understandable after being the Hulk for several years. They continued that arc in Infinity War, which again made sense, but it was just utterly ruined in Endgame. He became a punchline and was a ridiculous character, and he didn't have his moment. And personally, I don't count snapping his fingers as a moment. And then in She-Hulk, he just became a beta male punching bag. The destruction of Nick Fury started in Captain Marvel. Up to that point, Fury was a sharp, forceful, insightful, and direct character. He was exactly who he should be. And to be honest, I had no major problem with how he was in the film. I mean, they did the typical thing with female-led films these days of demeaning the male, but at the end of the day, he wasn't Nick Fury yet. But it was the cat. And I know it's a flirkin, but that's not what people will remember. They will remember that Nick Fury, this old warhorse, this man who has secrets on secrets, this man who's been through the mill, lost his eye to a cat. It may have just been a silly joke, but it damages the character's credibility. I have to say it's quite fitting that in the penultimate episode of Secret Invasion, it featured Nick Fury's grave, because really that show buried him. He's not just a useless old man who's barely a shadow of himself, but it turns out he never was who we thought he was. He was never this amazing super spy, but always just an office jock who got lucky by meeting the Skrulls. Legacy destroyed. I mean, we all know that's not who he was, because we've seen phases 1 to 3, but this is what they're now deciding to tell us. I'm not going to go into Wakanda Forever, but suffice to say, T'Challa dies of stupidity. And as for Iron Man, apparently sacrificing your life to save half the universe doesn't exempt you from being devalued and ridiculed. Because in She-Hulk, there's a reference to heroes being billionaires and narcissists and adult orphans. And not to mention the daddy issues comment in the last episode. Even Cap gets some shade thrown on him in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I mean, he treated Sam like an equal, but apparently that's wrong. But in fairness, Sam doesn't really come out of that show well either. Probably due to his complete personality change and the incredibly dumb speech. But there's more than just character assassination. Take Loki, for example. Bear in mind, this was the Avengers Loki. And putting aside how he was diminished next to the amazing Sylvie, because we're told constantly she's better than him, and spent a large part of one episode being repeatedly kicked in the nuts, as well as putting on a blanket because he was cold. Clearly someone forgot he's a frost giant, for God's sake. But the Infinity Stones were treated as meaningless baubles for a joke. They had a drawer full of them. I mean, think on that for a moment. These were formed after the Big Bang and controlled an essential aspect of existence. They were the driving force behind Thanos and the whole of the first three phases. They were key to it. And in this show, they're used as paperweights. And the narrative itself of the sacred timeline that is protected because he who remains, as in Kang, wants one timeline. So as a result, nobody had any agency. Everything that happened up to this point happened because he wanted it to happen that way. So you could argue that Cap didn't jump on that grenade out of choice. He may not have done it thousands of times, and each time those timelines were erased until one arrived where he did it. Thor Love and Thunder went one better, of course, by having the Infinity Gauntlet being the signage of an ice cream parlour in New Asgard. You remember the Asgardians, right? Thanos slaughtered half of their population shortly after Asgard was destroyed. And those people didn't come back. They're gone. Literally, what the hell? And as referred to earlier, She-Hulk's Karen moment of complaining to the manager and a speech which undermines every film that came before, as well as multiple characters. And even a new arrival gets it when Kingpin turns up. He's stopped by a little girl who's had no real experience. Now, I think I've said before, I defend that based on comic tropes, because many times heroes have beaten people stronger than them using their smarts and luck. But it's not a great introduction into the MCU for someone who's supposed to be a major villain and a major threat. I'm not sure if all this is supposed to be funny, parodying the past, making jokes of these things, or whether, as I suspect, it's more of an insidious, deliberate effort to dismantle that legacy, to try to legitimise the Z-level characters we're going to get going forward. But whichever it is, by ridiculing your own franchise, you devalue it in the eyes of the viewer. If you folks at Marvel don't care, why should we? Why should I get invested in Shang-Chi when you can make fun of Iron Man? When you can turn him into a joke? How long before you turn Shang-Chi into a joke and start ridiculing him? Although in fairness, they already did that in his first movie. As I said at the start, there are a lot of problems with the MCU. Driven a lot by bad decisions, bad hirings, agenda, and there's no denying that. Kevin Feige literally said it. But this one isn't insignificant either, certainly not in my mind. And it is a source of irritation to me. You've turned your franchise into a joke, and not a very funny one. And it feels driven by the words uttered in another terminally damaged franchise. Let the past die, kill it if you have to. So what do you guys think? Can you think of any other times where characters have been devalued or circumstances have been ridiculed? I'm sure I've missed a few. I'm sure there's another one about Iron Man I can't remember. But as always, I'd be interested to hear your comments. In the meantime, please like and subscribe, and thank you very much for listening. Peace out.